3 creepy true home invasions. This is Mr. H. You're listening to Masked Horror. The night he came back. My name is John. I grew up in a lower middle class neighborhood, the kind of place where you never really had to worry about danger. I always felt safe, and I thought it would stay that way forever. But I was wrong. It all started one weekend when I was staying at my friend's house for a sleepover. His parents were out of town for business, and we had the house to ourselves. We spent the evening watching movies and playing video games until late. But when we finally went to bed, I struggled to fall asleep. My friend's snoring was unbearably loud, so after an hour of tossing and turning, I grabbed my blanket and moved to the living room couch. I was finally able to drift off. However, around 2 a.m, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't anything too alarming at first, just some soft rustling sounds from the kitchen. I was groggy and didn't think much of it. I figured it was my friend getting up for a snack. Still, the noise persisted, louder this time. Footsteps, followed by a strange metallic clatter. Annoyed, I decided to go to tell him to keep it down. I got up, yawning as I walked towards the kitchen. As soon as I stepped into the doorway, I froze. What I saw still gives me nightmares till this day. Standing in the middle of the kitchen was a man. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and wore dark clothes. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but what I could see sent chills down my spine. In his hand was a large kitchen knife. For a second, I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. My body was frozen with fear. Then my instincts kicked in, and I let out the loudest scream I've ever made in my life. A blood-curdling scream. I bolted towards the nearest room, the bathroom, and slammed the door behind me. My heart pounded as I locked it, praying that the man wouldn't get in. Suddenly, the door shook as the man banged on it. His voice was low and menacing. "I'm going to kill you," he yelled, his words sending terror through me. He kept slamming on the door, screaming that he was going to kill me and my family. I didn't have my phone on me, and I had no way to call for help. I just sat there, shaking, waiting for him to eventually break down the door or for God to save me somehow. But after a few terrifying minutes, everything went quiet. I waited, heart pounding, afraid to move. Eventually, I crept out of the bathroom. The house was eerily silent, and the man was gone. I grabbed my phone and called 911. By the time the cops arrived, he had vanished. My parents came to get me. My friend stayed with us until his parents returned. I thought I was safe again, that it was over, but it wasn't. A few days later, something even more unsettling happened. I was riding my bike home from my grandparents' house, which was just a few blocks away. As I was turning onto my street, I noticed a silver Toyota Camry slowly following me. I don't know if they were trying to do anything creepy, or if that was the same guy. I felt my chest tighten with anxiety. Was it him? Was it someone else? I quickly pedaled into my driveway, watching as the car stopped a few houses down before driving off. My fear was back. I thought I was done with that guy forever, but ever since that night, all that was on my mind was if that guy from my friend's house knew where I lived. The worst part came one morning before school. My mom asked me if I had been messing around with spray paint. Confused, I followed her outside, and my heart sank. Scrawled across our front door in red spray paint were 2 chilling words: "Remember me." Beneath the words, a sinister smiley face staring right back at me. The disguised delivery man. I thought I lived in a safe neighborhood, quiet, friendly, the kind of place where you could leave your front door unlocked without a second thought. My boyfriend Matt and I had just moved into our new home, and everything felt perfect. That changed the day someone broke in while we were both at work. Nothing valuable was taken, no electronics, no jewelry. Instead, the intruder had done something far creepier. They had rearranged our things. Picture frames were turned around, books moved from one shelf to another. My makeup had been scattered across the bathroom counter. Some of my underwear and some special lingerie I was planning to wear for Matt was either taken or ripped to pieces on the floor. I felt like whoever had been in our home knew us, like they were toying with us. Matt and I called the police, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. Probably some kids messing around, they told us. I wanted to believe that, but something didn't sit right. A few days later, a delivery man showed up at our door with a package. We hadn't ordered anything, but sometimes Matt surprises me with little gifts, so I didn't think too much about it. But then, I recognized the man. I'd seen him before, on the street, at the grocery store, even in front of my office once, just standing there, watching. His face was seared into my memory, but I couldn't place why. After that day, I began seeing him everywhere. At first, I convinced myself it was paranoia, but then it became too much to ignore. He was always at a distance, just far enough not to seem like a threat, but close enough to make my skin crawl. When Matt saw him outside our house one night, staring from across the street, we finally called the police again. We showed them the security footage from our doorbell camera, and they agreed to investigate. That's when we learned the truth. The delivery man had been stalking me for months. Turns out, he'd first seen me at my job. Or rather was, a realtor. He delivered a package to my office one afternoon. I barely noticed him, just another face in the crowd. But apparently, he noticed me. More than that, he became obsessed. The police found out he'd been making fake calls to my office, pretending to be a potential buyer. Those appointments where I'd driven out to show houses, only for the client to never show up. It had been him, watching from a distance, learning my schedule, my habits, my life. He wasn't just interested in me though, he was jealous of Matt. He knew about our relationship, and it ate away at him. The police believe he was planning something far worse, maybe to hurt Matt, maybe to do something even more disturbing to me. I'll never forget the feeling when they told me. I'd been walking around for weeks, oblivious, while someone was plotting against me in the background. Eventually they caught him. He was arrested, and I got a restraining order. It's supposed to make me feel safe, but it doesn't. He's apparently done this to others in the past. Even with the restraining order and him being arrested, I'm always looking over my shoulder, always checking my locks, checking the faces of people around me. I'm still involved in real estate, but quit being a realtor not long after. I couldn't handle the thought of walking into another empty house alone, not knowing who might be watching. The emergency entry. It was just a regular Friday night. My wife and I were sitting on the couch, watching some mindless TV after a long week. It was around 9 p.m., dark outside, but nothing unusual. Then came the banging on the front door. Frantic, desperate. We both froze, exchanging confused glances. I got up on alert and peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing there in what looked like a gas company uniform. He had a badge and a makeshift siren on the top of his car, the kind you'd see on utility trucks, but looking back, something just didn't seem right. He was shouting, saying something about a gas leak down the street, that it was an emergency, and he needed to check our house for safety. Eve told me not to open the door, but the guy was so frantic, like he was doing us a favor by being there. So against my better judgment, I let him in. He walked in quickly, didn't say much, just scanned the room like he was in a hurry. He made a beeline for the kitchen, pretending to check pipes, faucets, and our stove. He was all business, moving fast, but there was something off about him. He barely looked at the appliances. His eyes were darting around, almost like he was studying the place. Eve stood by the front door, her phone in hand, ready to call someone if things felt any weirder. He flashed a badge at her, barely long enough for us to read anything, and I asked him which street the gas leak was on. He mumbled something I couldn't catch and told us to stay back just in case. After a few minutes, he was done and rushed out, but not before brushing against the back door and the windows near the living room. He mumbled something about us being safe now, and then, just like that, he was gone. But as soon as he left, the house felt different. Eve looked at me, and I could see the unease in her eyes. "That didn't feel right," she whispered. And she was right. Something was wrong. I went over to the front door and checked the locks. Everything seemed fine. Then I moved to the windows, and that's when I noticed it. One of them, the one he'd brushed against, was unlocked. My stomach dropped. We immediately checked our security footage. The guy wasn't driving a real utility truck. He'd rigged some cheap siren onto a regular car, and the badge he flashed, it was barely visible on the footage, but I could tell it wasn't real. The way he moved around, touching our doors, unlocking windows, he wasn't checking for gas. He was casing the place. I called the gas company to confirm, but the line was busy. That only made my heart race faster. Eve was already calling the police by the time I hung up. They showed up quickly, thank God, and helped us secure every door and window in the house. But then I realized something else. A small box of jewelry was missing from our bedroom. It wasn't the most expensive stuff, but the fact that he'd taken something while we were right there, that terrified me more than the loss itself. The police said we were lucky. Lucky? Maybe we were, but the thought of him coming back, maybe in the middle of the night while we were sleeping, that was what kept me awake. We never saw him again. I assume he spotted the police car and knew he couldn't come back, but the damage was done. We felt violated, like we couldn't trust our own home anymore. I still replay that night in my head, thinking how much worse it could have been. What if we hadn't checked the windows right away? What if he'd come back quietly slipping into our home while we slept, completely unaware? The thought haunts me. Every noise at night now makes my skin crawl. There's no real closure to this. We've upgraded our security system, added extra locks, but the damage was done. I'm not as trusting as I used to be. That feeling of safety, of our home being a place where we could relax, is gone. I never imagined that someone, just pretending to help, could turn our lives upside down like that. But it happened. It could happen to anyone. I just never thought it would ever happen to us. A note from the author. Please keep this as it is, and do not change this part. If you feel compelled to put this in your video, I would appreciate it. While I've always enjoyed scary stories, and your channel as a new subscriber, this time I felt compelled to share a personal experience. What happened to me was far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined, and writing it down is my way of trying to process it and come to terms with it. I'm hoping this helps me move on, but more importantly, I hope it serves as a warning to others. Always trust your instincts, take precautions, and never ignore that gut feeling when something doesn't feel right. What happened to me could easily happen to anyone, and I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Stay safe and always trust your gut.